I always thought the stars were too far away to matter. We had our soil, our cycles, and the hum of wind through the stalks to guide us. The world was honest here. Hard, yes, but honest. And Ren was the light in all that roughness. Strong hands, quicker wit. I used to tell her she made the fields bloom faster just by grinning. Ours was a quiet moon, an agri planet, tucked so deep in the segmentum obscurus, most charts forgot its name. We called it Duskfall. Fitting, now that I think about it. We were born to harvest. Wheat, grox, synth root. It didn't matter. Each year we'd gather it in, under the old statues of the Emperor's saints, pack it up in long crates, and wait for the Imperium to send a ship to collect. And they always did. Same protocol, same stiff greetings, same sky grey robes and unreadable faces, until this time. It was Ren who saw it first, standing with me on the barn roof after supper. The sky cracked open in a bloom of green fire as the dropship breached the atmosphere, bigger than usual, long and angular, like a blade made for shearing the clouds. It didn't roar in, it glided, quiet as fog. That silence unsettled me, more than I admitted then. "They're early," I muttered, chewing a stem of straw. "They're wrong," Ren said. Her eyes never left the ship. "That's not the usual pattern lights. And look at how it's turning. That's not descent protocol." She was right. The ship hovered just above the main ridge. No landing beacons, no comms broadcast, no vox greeting, just the slow, yawning hum of metal, echoing off the mountains like a distant animal's breath. "Think they're Mechanicus?" I asked her. "Could be new tech." Ren's hand slipped into mine. The calluses of her palm a comfort more than I could ever put into words. "I think we should tell Rin." We climbed down. The barn ladder creaked under us. I remember the feel of the earth when we landed, how real and grounding it was. I didn't know it would be the last time it felt like home. Old Rin, the town elder, called an emergency assembly in the hall. Everyone turned out, 58 of us counting the children. Rin stood by the old Aquila banner, clutching his staff like a man expecting storm winds. This ship didn't signal arrival. No clearance, no transmission, but it bears Imperial markings. That means we treat it as Imperial. Understood? Murmurs followed, nervous and uncertain. "They're probably just a new collection crew," Marta the baker said, brushing flour off her apron. "Maybe off-world logistics changed. Not with those engine lights," said Fen, the butcher, who never trusted anything that came from the sky. I felt Ren's hand tighten around mine. "I don't like this." "I know," I said. We waited for hours. The ship finally touched down near the eastern fields, our wheat crop, and the engines went dead. The ramp lowered. Out walked 20 crew members. They wore grey robes like administratum harvesters, but the Aquilas on their shoulders were wrong, twisted, like someone had tried to sculpt them from melted wax. One of them had 8 wings, another no heads. The real emblem is sacred, symmetrical. These weren't. And their smiles, every single one of them grinned from ear to ear, even as they marched silently toward us. No blinking, no words, just wide, dry-lipped grins. Rin stepped forward. "I am Elder Rin, servant of this province. By your silence, I assume you come to collect the harvest. Please, speak." The lead figure tilted his head. His grin widened, if that was possible. Then, in a dry, rasping voice like parchment tearing, he spoke. "We are here to reap, and nothing more. No crates were inspected, no papers signed. The crew simply wandered the village, one to each home, pacing silently, nodding at shrines, grinning at children, watching. I saw one of them kneel beside a pile of manure and run his fingers through it. He sniffed it, smiled wider, said nothing. No one dared stop them. That night the village fell quiet, far too early. No fires, no drinking, no music. The only sound was the low hum of the ship, still sitting there, its engines off but somehow alive. Ren and I stayed on the barn roof again, wrapped in an old blanket, hearts too loud in the stillness. We didn't speak much. What was there to say? Then we heard it. Software faint, but unmistakable, chanting. From the woods, far off at first, like a breeze carrying strange syllables. Low Gothic, yes, but twisted, bent. Rhythms that made the stomach tighten, even if you couldn't place why. I felt Ren shiver beside me. That's not a hymn. No, I said, trying to sound brave. It's not. The trees rustled beneath a sky gone dark too fast. The harvest moon, our moon, was rising again, but it didn't feel like a blessing this time. It felt like the start of something terrible. Ren didn't speak again for a long time. She just leaned into me, head resting on my shoulder, her breath warm against my collar. I remember thinking how much I loved that silence between us, how easy it was. I'd have traded anything to hold on to that moment, but the silence down in the village wasn't comforting. It was thick, waiting, like the land itself had started holding its breath. One of the crewmen walked alone through the barley fields by torchlight, dragging something behind him. It left a trail in the dirt. I couldn't make out what it was, but the movement was too smooth, too practiced. Whatever it wasn't struggling. Do you think we're in danger? Ren asked, her voice a whisper, barely more than a thought. I don't know, I admitted, but if we are, we'll handle it. We always do. She gave a tired smile, but her eyes didn't match it. Below us, in the distance, that chanting started again, closer now. Not just from the woods, but from behind the grain silos, somewhere in the old tractor shed too. The syllables were sharp and rhythmical, but not words we knew, not from any sermon or prayer. Something had seeded itself in our world, something that had been waiting for the harvest, but it wasn't here to collect wheat, it was here for us. Ren and I didn't sleep that night. The chanting rose and fell like wind moving through the woods, soft one moment, then swelling suddenly with a sick rhythm, as if the forest itself had learned how to breathe wrong. Every now and then, a new voice joined the chorus, thin and distant, like someone muttering from under the soil. I kept one hand on the knife strapped to my boot the whole time. By morning, the chanting was gone, vanished like a dream you can't hold on to, but that leaves your sheets damp with sweat. The village tried to pretend it hadn't heard anything. People worked slower, eyes lingered longer than normal. Everyone was smiling, a little too wide. The 20 strangers were still among us, now fully embedded. No one stopped them anymore. They didn't take rooms or ask for food, but they lingered in barns, near wells, by the harvest shrines, always watching, always grinning. One had taken up position outside the mill and just stood there, from dawn to dusk, head tilted to the side, like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. I passed him 3 times that day. His face didn't change. His eyes didn't blink. I want to know what they're doing, Ren whispered beside me as we carted sheaves to the silo. Why are they here if they're not collecting anything? They're not even pretending anymore, I said. They're not checking weights, not recording anything. They just smile. That smile had begun to spread, literally. Marta, the baker, had always been kind, quiet, soft-spoken, always gave kids extra rolls, but this morning her lips were cracked from smiling too long, and her apron was covered in flour, except the handprints weren't hers. Too large, too many fingers. I asked her if she'd seen anything strange last night. She smiled. No more than usual, dear. Then she turned and whispered something to a loaf of dough, as if expecting it to whisper back. I didn't tell Ren. She was already watching the woods like she expected them to reach out and pull us in. At midday, Elder Rin held a meeting with the crew inside the town hall. Only a handful of us were allowed in. I wasn't one of them, but Ren and I waited outside, sitting under the old grain bell. We watched the others filter in, headmen, labour captains, harvest monitors, and we watched the crew walk in afterward, gliding more than walking, like they were moving through something denser than air. One of them paused at the threshold of the building. He looked at the aquila carved above the door, tilted his head the other way, then reached up and touched it, just a single gloved finger to the holy symbol. It cracked, right down the middle. He smiled. When the doors shut behind them, we listened. There were no raised voices, no discussion, just silence. After half an hour, Ren stood up. Something's wrong. She pushed the door open without waiting for permission. I followed her. Inside, all the crew members were still standing. Their smiles were unchanged. Their eyes stared at Rin, who was sitting behind the central table, with his hands folded and shaking. "We should leave," he said softly, eyes not moving. "It's not harvest time." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "They say the harvest is already happening." His hands trembled harder. "But we're the grain." One of the crew stepped forward. He placed a hand on Rin's shoulder, gently, almost lovingly. Then he leaned forward and whispered something into the old man's ear. Rin went stiff. His eyes rolled back. He slumped over the table, eyes wide, mouth stuck in a half-formed scream, but no sound came out. We backed out of the room. No one stopped us. Outside, the air smelled wrong, like wet copper and something fermented. The bells had stopped ringing hours ago. Even the wind had gone still. That night, Ren and I stayed in my loft, above the barn. We didn't speak. We just sat with our backs against the wall, watching the moon move like a slow, pale wound across the sky. Somewhere near midnight, the barn door creaked. I held my breath. Then it creaked again, wider this time, a slow, dragging scrape. Ren rose to her knees beside me, her knife already drawn. I reached for mine. There was breathing below us, low, wet, guttural. Then footsteps on the straw. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They stopped directly below the ladder that led up to the loft. I could see a shadow from the moonlight, a figure with long limbs, slightly too thin, head tilted upward, like it could sense us by sound alone. Then it smiled, not in the normal way. Number. This grin grew, lips stretching, the cheeks splitting until the face looked torn open from both ends. No human should smile like that. I gripped my blade tighter, but the thing, whatever it was, just stood there, grinning up at us. Then it turned and walked back into the night. We didn't sleep again. We left the barn at first light. I don't know why we thought the sunlight would help. Maybe it's something in the old stories, that evil flees the dawn. But the light didn't chase anything away. It only made what we saw clearer. The ground wasn't right. The stalks in the eastern field, our pride crop, had grown 2 feet overnight. They were thicker than they should be, twisted at the stems, and their heads had begun to droop like they were too heavy with seed. And the smell, it was wrong, rot and copper, like the plants were bleeding from inside. I knelt and ran my fingers through the soil. It was warm, too warm, like it had a pulse. Ren stayed beside me, arms folded, watching the rows of wheat sway without any wind. "We need to talk to someone," she said finally. "Who's left to trust?" I muttered. "Rin's broken. Martyrs whispering to her doe. Fen keeps drawing that weird symbol in the dust with his finger, over and over." Ren didn't reply. I think we both knew the answer. No one. Then came the scream. It echoed from the western ridge, near Egan's property. We ran. We found him in his tool shed, shirtless, digging at the floorboards with his bare hands. His nails were cracked, fingers caked in blood. He didn't stop when we called his name. Didn't even look up. Just kept digging, whispering to the dirt below. "They told me," he muttered. "They said it's time to return what we borrowed. The soil is memory. The roots remember." "Egan!" I shouted, stepping closer. "What are you talking about?" He finally looked up. His face was covered in dirt, but that wasn't the worst of it. He was smiling, that same too wide, slack-jawed grin, but tears ran freely down his face. Confusion, joy, terror, all at once. I saw them in my dreams, Daren. I saw the fields full of mouths. They opened and sang to me. He lunged toward me with a trowel. Ren was faster. She tackled him hard, knocked the tool away. I pinned him down as he screamed and thrashed, his legs kicking against the wood. Then he just stopped and said perfectly calmly, "There's something buried beneath us. We've been feeding it for generations." We left him unconscious, bound his hands, and locked the shed door from the outside. We didn't know what else to do. As we walked back, Ren said nothing, but she kept looking at the ground like she expected it to split open under her boots. That afternoon I checked my father's old ploughshed. I didn't want to, but something had been nagging at me all morning. He was a quiet man in life, obsessed with order and schedules. When he died, I swore I'd keep the old shed exactly as he left it. But something wasn't as he left it. Inside, the floorboards had been pried loose. Underneath, someone had carved symbols into the earth, not with tools, by hand. Deep grooves, concentric spirals, symbols that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. And in the center, a small wooden totem, rough, primitive. It looked like a stalk of wheat, except it had a face, grinning wide, its mouth split to the chin. The grain tips had tiny fingernails. I smashed it, burned it in the field, but the smell stayed on my hands for hours, like ash and vinegar, and something far older. That night we stayed in Ren's loft. I didn't want to be near the ploughshed. We blocked the door, covered the windows, and tried to eat a cold meal. Neither of us could manage more than a few bites. "I think they've been changing us," Ren said. Her voice was small, not afraid, just tired. "Not us," I said. "Not you." She looked at me. "How can you be sure?" I couldn't answer. "I had a dream," she said after a long silence. "I was kneeling in the fields. Everyone was around me, smiling. They poured soil into my mouth, kept telling me to grow, and I did. My arms turned to roots, my eyes filled with seeds. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. It was just a dream," I whispered. But I didn't believe that, and neither did she. We didn't sleep again. Instead, we kept watch from the roof of the grain tower. From up there you can see most of the village, the shrine, the silos, the north woods. We saw them gathering around the harvest shrine at midnight. 30 villagers, including children, all chanting. They poured something red into the shrine's basin, then they knelt. One by one they placed offerings at the base of the statue. A cracked skull, a bundle of stitched animal hides, a finger, still bleeding. They swayed, they whispered, and then they all turned at once and looked straight at the grain tower, at us. They didn't move, didn't speak, just smiled. Ren gripped my arm. They knew we were watching. I know. I couldn't look away, because in the center of them all was Marta. Her mouth was full of dirt. We didn't go down that night. We stayed on the tower until the sky paled and the villagers finally wandered off, one by one, into the misty fields. They didn't speak, they didn't look back, but their silence said more than screams ever could. By morning, Ren was pale. She hadn't blinked in hours. "We need to leave," she said. "We will," I told her, though I didn't know where we'd go. "But first, I want to see the shrine." "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked. "Because whatever's happening, it's spreading from there, and I need to know what's underneath it." We waited until midday, when most of the town gathered in the central square for the inspection ceremony. It was a formality, usually just a few checks and logs from the visiting crew, but now the whole event was a farce. The strangers simply watched from the edges of the crowd, grinning while our people stood in perfect lines, eyes vacant. That's when we slipped away toward the shrine. The harvest shrine sat on a hill just outside the village. It had always been a quiet place. Weather-worn statues of the emperor, baskets of dried grain offerings, old prayer cloths fluttering in the wind. A place for reflection, peace. Now it looked like a mouth. The stone basin at the center had been blackened with smoke, the offerings replaced with twisted bundles of feathers and bones bound in bloody string. Symbols had been carved across every flat surface, into the statues' faces, the stone columns, even into the bark of the trees surrounding the hill. And something had been buried in the soil, something big. The ground around the shrine bulged unnaturally, like a root system straining to reach the surface. I knelt and placed my hand on the dirt. It vibrated. Ren gripped my shoulder. "Daren, look." She pointed to the main statue. It had once been a simple depiction of Saint Haldric, the patron of seed and sun. Now his eyes were gouged out. His mouth had been carved wider, so wide that it stretched from ear to ear. Someone had filled the hollow with dried husks and teeth, real teeth. We both backed away. Then we heard the procession, dozens of feet, boots and bare soles trampling dry grass in rhythm. The town was coming. We ducked behind the outer trees, keeping low. The villagers filed in with perfect coordination, silent, heads bowed. Children walked at the front, holding ropes strung with fetishes, clumps of hair, cracked bird skulls, flayed stalks of grain. Behind them came the adults, chanting in a whispering tongue that slithered through the air like smoke. I couldn't understand a word, but I felt it in my spine. One of the Imperial crew stood at the center of the shrine, arms raised. He was taller than the rest, bald, pale, skin so thin I could see his veins pulsing like vines beneath. His robe was different too, stitched with fibers that shimmered and crawled as he moved. He didn't speak, he sang, low, rumbling, like a funeral dirge dragged from the depths of a cave. The villagers joined him, swaying, their voices growing louder. That's when one of them stepped forward. It was Hale, the miller's boy, barely 17. He walked with glassy eyes and bare feet, his shirt soaked in sweat and filth. He stood in front of the shrine, opened his mouth, and screamed. It wasn't a sound of fear, it was triumph, release. His jaw split wide, far too wide, and then he collapsed, convulsing, foaming at the mouth. The chanting rose in pitch, a feverish crescendo. Hale's body bent backward in an unnatural arc. His limbs jerked, his fingers clawing at the dirt. Then his chest began to bulge, as if something inside was trying to escape. Ren gasped. I pulled her closer. And then Hale burst, not in blood, but in grain. Blackened stalks tore through his flesh, sprouting from his ribs, his throat, even his eye sockets. The villagers roared in approval, falling to their knees, reaching out to bless the writhing harvest, erupting from the boy's body. Ren covered her mouth to keep from screaming. "We have to go," I whispered. "Now." We crept back into the woods, trembling, trying not to break a single twig. The further we got from the shrine, the more the trees felt alive, watching. Some of the branches bore no leaves anymore, just strands of fabric and clumps of hair, tied like offerings. By the time we reached the edge of town, the sun had dipped below the hills. We hid in my father's cellar for the night. It was damp, but it felt safe, or at least, safer than anywhere else. Ren curled beside me, under an old blanket. I held her close and listened to her breathing, fast and shallow. "I thought Hale was my friend," she said finally, voice cracking. "We used to run in those fields together. I know. He didn't fight it. No." I didn't tell her what scared me most, that Hale had smiled before he fell, that even through the pain he'd seemed grateful. We left before the second bell. Ren packed what we could carry, dried root cakes, water pouches, my father's rusted pistol, and a lantern with 2 half-melted candles. I brought the hunting knife and my satchel of tools, not that I knew what good they'd do. The roads weren't safe anymore. People stood along the edges like trees, unmoving, smiling, humming songs we didn't recognize. No words, just soft, throaty vibrations, like lullabies meant for something under the soil. We cut through the barley fields instead. The stalks had grown taller than me and thicker. Brushing against them left red scratches on our arms, as though the plants resented being touched. "They're not harvesting anymore," Ren said after an hour. "No one's working." She was right. Every field we passed was abandoned. Tools dropped mid-use, plows rusting in place, baskets tipped and rotting with fruit still inside. But there were carvings everywhere now, on the trunks of trees, on the sides of homes, on the fences, a repeated symbol, a stalk of wheat with a mouth inside the head, always grinning, always bleeding. We saw Marta again. She was kneeling in the middle of her vegetable patch, hands folded. Her mouth was full of soil. She chewed slowly, methodically, never looking up. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Ren started to cry after we passed the second well. Someone had stuffed a goat into the bucket, its throat slit, its legs tied with harvest twine. Around it, crude symbols had been painted in blood on the stone rim. We turned north, toward the deep woods. I hadn't been there in years, not since I was a boy, but I remembered the trails, the game paths, the tiny river that could lead us to the canyon. There was a story once about an old hunting shack out there. Maybe it was just a story, but it was better than staying. We were halfway to the first ridge when we heard the voices, children, laughing. It chilled me more than any scream could have. Ren crouched beside me in the tall grass and pointed. There, by the tree line, a group of 5 villagers, 3 adults, 2 children. One of the kids, a boy no older than 10, stood in the center, holding something cradled in his hands. A bird, a sparrow still twitching, one wing broken. The boy set it down on a flat stone and pulled a small blade from his belt. He began to hum. Then he carved a symbol into the bird's chest, slowly, carefully. The sparrow didn't make a sound. The adults stood around him, nodding in approval. One of them, the tanner, I realized, clapped softly, like it was a school recital. The boy sliced the bird's neck open, caught the blood in a bowl, and began painting a symbol on the stone. I almost moved. I almost stood and shouted, but Ren's hand gripped my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "They'll see us." The boy smiled. Not at the bird, not at the stone, at us. His eyes locked onto mine like he'd known I was there the whole time. The smile widened. He opened his mouth and spoke a word I didn't understand, but it echoed through the trees like thunder in reverse, a sucking sound that made my teeth hurt. The forest around us seemed to inhale, and the ground beneath my boots shuddered. "Run," Ren whispered. We ran. We didn't stop until our lungs burned and the forest swallowed us whole. The light began to dim. Branches grew tighter overhead, twisting like fingers locking above our heads. The moss beneath our feet grew wet and slick, and every tree trunk bore the same carved grin. They watched us. I swear they watched us. We stopped when we reached a grove with an old half-collapsed watchtower. The metal frame had rusted, and the stairs were long gone, but it was something. Shelter. A place to breathe. Ren collapsed at the base of the tower and curled her knees to her chest. "They're all gone," she whispered. "We're not," I said. "But for how long?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the knife and cut into the bark of the nearest tree. Just a line. Just a scratch. Some childish hope that if I could mark the world, it meant I still existed. The sap ran red. Ren saw it too. We both stared at the bleeding tree. Then, we looked at each other. "We shouldn't be here," she said. "I know." But we had nowhere else to go. That night the forest pulsed. I don't know how else to say it. The trees bent in unison. The roots trembled under our feet. The stars vanished behind clouds that smelled like meat. and all around us, deep in the woods, the villagers sang. They were coming, not to chase us, not yet. They were preparing. For what, I didn't know. But Ren looked at me, eyes glassy, lips trembling, and asked the question I couldn't face. What if we're the last ones? We slept in turns that night, or at least we tried. The forest never stopped moving. It creaked and sighed like an old animal settling into the earth. And there was a sound, soft, distant, but always there. A low, humming moan, like the world was trying to sing through clenched teeth. When dawn finally broke, the light didn't feel like light. It was grey, sickly, filtered through a fog that clung to the air like rot. We need to keep moving, Ren said, packing the last of our supplies. I nodded, too tired to speak. My muscles ached, my throat was raw, and my mind buzzed with echoes of the chanting we'd heard from the village. It hadn't stopped. It had just gone underground. We moved through the trees slowly. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too symmetrical. Branches twisted into archways, roots spiraled into patterns, and everywhere the same symbol, the grinning wheat stalk, carved or grown or burned into bark and stone alike. We found the first survivor just past midday. He was sitting by a broken wheel cart in a clearing, staring at nothing. His skin was pale, his clothes torn and damp. For a moment I thought he was dead, until he blinked. I raised my hands. We're not part of it, I said gently. We ran too. He didn't answer. Ren stepped forward. Are you alone? He nodded once, then slowly lifted his arm and pointed behind him. A cluster of makeshift tents huddled beneath a thick canopy of drooping vines. 5 people moved quietly between them. None of them spoke. None of them smiled. Their eyes were dark and sunken, and they walked like sleepwalkers. We entered the camp cautiously. A woman with a scar down her cheek handed Ren a tin of boiled roots, without a word. A tall man wrapped in a wool cloak nodded to me, then continued stacking rocks into a perfect pyramid over and over. There was no joy here, no fear either, just emptiness. We're safe here, someone whispered behind us. I turned. The voice had come from a thin, hunched man, sitting cross-legged on a stump. His eyes were covered with a dirty cloth, and his lips were stitched shut with thin black thread. Dozens of tiny puncture wounds circled his jaw like petals. He reached up and tapped his sealed mouth, then pointed to his ear, then to the trees. Ren stepped closer. The song? He nodded. I crouched beside him. You heard it too. His shoulders twitched. A flinch. He nodded again, then pointed to a leather-bound book on the ground beside him. The pages were covered in frantic scrawlings, half Gothic, half symbols, all barely legible. Drawings of mouths growing in soil, eyes sprouting from vines, diagrams of roots wrapped around skulls. At the center of one page, a figure with no face, crowned in grain, standing in a pit of writhing villagers. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know the answers. Ren handed him a piece of bread. He touched it, then tucked it into his coat. Still silent. That night the fog returned, thicker, greyer. It coiled between the trees like living smoke. The survivors lit no fires. We don't want to be seen, the scarred woman whispered, her voice barely audible. It likes the warmth. What does? I asked. She just stared at me. When I woke, someone was gone. The tall man in the wool cloak vanished. His pyramid of stones was still there, but now the stones were wet, and the ground beneath them steamed like it had been boiling. Ren refused to sleep after that. Daren, she whispered, as we sat back to back beneath a pine. I don't think this place is real. What do you mean? She shook her head. It feels staged, like it's pretending to be a camp, but there's no food growing, no tools, no fire pits, just people standing around, waiting. Waiting for what? Her answer chilled me. For it to finish us. We left at first light. The others didn't stop us. They didn't even blink. They just stood in the fog and watched us walk away, except for the man with the sewn mouth. As we passed, he grabbed my wrist. Fast and strong, he leaned close and whispered, even through the stitches. They dig up the sky to bury the roots. Then, he let go. His blood had smeared my wrist. We didn't look back. We walked for hours. The fog clung to us like wet wool. Everything was wet. The trees dripped. The air stuck to our skin. Even our breath felt heavier, like the forest was trying to breathe through us. Then, the sap started. First, I saw it oozing from a cracked tree stump, shiny, metallic, like quicksilver with a reddish tint. It pulsed as it ran. Then we saw more. Trees crying metal, leaves curled like fingers, grass that whispered when it moved. And the sound returned, the humming, louder now, layered with whispers that weren't quite words. Ren stumbled and grabbed my arm. "It's inside the roots," she gasped. "It's growing toward us. We have to keep moving." She stopped. Up ahead, the fog parted for just a moment, revealing a clearing lit by an unnatural glow. In the center stood a small shrine, new, not built by human hands, not stone, not wood. It was made of vines, flesh, bone, wrapped together and shaped like the Emperor's Aquila, but broken, twisted, inverted. In its center, a bundle of wheat, grinning, bleeding, alive. I pulled Ren back. "We're not going that way." She didn't resist. We turned north again, but I knew something had shifted. The land was warping, and we were getting close to the center of whatever this was. We didn't want to go back, but we had no choice. We'd run out of food. Our water skins were nearly dry. The fog was creeping further north by the hour, and the forest had stopped pretending to be forest. The roots pulsed. The air shimmered with that low hum we could feel in our bones. So we followed the ridgeline back down, hiding our trail, circling around through the old deer path that led near the mill. It was dangerous, but better than starving in a place that no longer obeyed the laws of nature. We crested the last hill at dusk, and I froze. The village wasn't our village anymore. The rooftops were covered in vines, thick, pulsing cords that slithered down chimneys and curled through broken windows. Bone wind chimes clattered in the warm breeze, strung together with tendon and old prayer cloths. The walls of homes had been painted with new symbols, endless spirals, curling roots, bleeding mouths shaped like seeds. Everything smelled of rotten sweetness, like meat left too long in the sun beside a flower bed. And the people. They moved through the streets like dancers in a trance, slow in unison, swaying to some rhythm we couldn't hear. Some wore robes stitched from old grain sacks and animal hides, adorned with bones and teeth. Others were shirtless, their skin etched with fresh carvings. Their eyes were empty, their smiles weren't. "We're not getting in," Ren whispered. "Yes, we are," I said. "Daren." "There's a tunnel," I told her, "behind the granary. It runs under the hill to the root cellar. My father used it during the rainstorms. If it's still there, we can get to the stores without being seen." Ren stared at me, then nodded. We kept low, circling behind the blacksmith shop, what was left of it. The anvil had been buried in vines. The forge was a mouth now, bricks peeled back like gums, black soot like a tongue spilling out. Someone had drawn a symbol on the bellows. It bled when I touched it. We reached the granary without being seen. The tunnel was still there. I pulled up the hatch, and we slipped inside, crawling through the narrow passage on hands and knees. The air was damp and warm. Something skittered past my fingers. I didn't look. I didn't want to know. We emerged inside the root cellar, lit only by a single flickering lumen strip. The shelves were half full, dried herbs, sealed tins, jugs of rainwater. We grabbed what we could, enough for 2 or 3 days, maybe more if we rationed. Then we heard the footsteps, above us. We froze. The trapdoor creaked open. A face leaned in. It was my mother. She was smiling. "Daren," she said softly, "you came home." My stomach turned. Her voice was too calm, too even. Her eyes had changed, pupil-less, wide and pale like a doll's. Her hair was knotted with dry stalks of wheat, and her arms were painted in spiraling symbols that wrapped all the way to her fingertips. "Come," she said. "They're waiting." "Mom," I choked. She extended her hand. "You'll see. It doesn't hurt. Not like before. It's peaceful now." Ren stepped forward, placing herself between us. "We're leaving." My mother's smile didn't falter. "No, child, you're blooming. You just don't know it yet." I reached for the knife on my belt. "Let us go. You don't need that anymore," she said gently. "There's no pain in the song." Then others appeared. From the stairwell, from the hatch behind us. 6, 7, 8 villagers, all smiling, all swaying. They didn't speak, they just advanced. "Lantern," Ren hissed. I lit the oil lantern and held it high. The light made them recoil, just slightly, enough to buy us seconds. "Back tunnel," I said. We turned and sprinted back down the crawl space, hunched over, slipping on the wet stone. I heard someone behind us breathing fast, crawling after us, humming. But they didn't follow past the granary. They didn't have to. They knew where we were going. We didn't stop until we were deep into the northern edge of the forest again. We collapsed beneath an overturned cart near the old stream, panting, filthy, shaking. "She's gone," I whispered. "My mother's gone." Ren placed her hand on my back. "I know." They didn't even try to hurt us. They wanted us to join, like it's a family. Ren stared into the darkness. "They think it is. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't just control them, it replaces them, one root at a time." I thought about Hale, Marta, the boy in the woods, the survivors who didn't speak, the humming fog, the flesh shrine. I thought about my mother's voice, still so familiar, so loving, wrapped around something utterly alien. "We can't go back," I said. Ren nodded slowly. "No, we're the last ones." She didn't argue. The fog was rising again. Ren collapsed the morning after we left the village. One moment she was gathering water at the stream. The next she was on her knees, clutching her head and gasping like she couldn't breathe. "Ren!" I dropped the supplies and rushed to her side. Her skin was clammy and her eyes twitched beneath the lids, like she was dreaming something too fast to follow. "It's inside," she whispered, over and over. "It's inside me. It's rooting." I held her as she shook, terrified. I didn't know what to do. The fever came on quick. Her spine arched like something had reached up through the earth and hooked her bones. But after a minute, it passed. Her body went limp, and she started crying. "I saw it, Daren." "What did you see?" She looked up at me, eyes wide and wet. "It's beneath everything. Below the fields, below the roots, below us. Waiting. It's not alive the way we are. It's older. It's always been here." I pulled her close. "You're not making sense." She gripped my shirt. "I'm not infected." "Then what's happening to you?" "I don't know, but I feel it watching me now. Like I've touched something I can't untouch." I looked around. The forest was too quiet again. No birds, no breeze, just the humming. We couldn't stay. We couldn't trust the land, the air. Even her body was betraying her now. But I remembered something from when I was a boy. A place the older men whispered about when drunk. The Glass Eye, they called it. An old observatory from before the village was built, hidden deep in the northern ridges, buried under vines and soil. A relic from before even the Emperor's ships came. If anyone had answers, it would be there. It took hours to find it. The entrance was half swallowed by a landslide and overgrowth. The dome had collapsed in on itself, and half the walls were cracked open, like a broken skull. But inside, the deeper room still stood, reinforced metal, lights still blinking faintly on rusted panels, dusty cogitators and data slates, long abandoned. Ren leaned on me as we descended the stairs, her breathing shallow but steady. "It feels quieter here," she whispered. I nodded. Maybe it's too deep for the roots. We entered the main chamber. The ceiling was covered in shattered glass and ancient star maps. Broken screens flickered with unreadable symbols, and in the corner, under a half-buried tarp, data modules, old, pre-heresy by the look of them. I brushed them off, found one with a cracked screen that still responded to touch, and loaded the last recovered file. It was a voice recording, faint, glitching. Planet shows latent psychic resonance. Soil reacts to vocal frequencies. Ritual speech accelerates growth cycles. Unconfirmed if local population will exhibit symptoms. Testing exposure using embedded clergy. Project Blooming is underway. My blood ran cold. Inquisitorial clearance granted for full deployment. No surviving records beyond this log. If found, assume contamination. Burn everything. The file ended. I stared at Ren. They planted this, I said. She nodded slowly, eyes glassy. This whole planet, it was a test site. She closed her eyes. We were seeds. I kept searching, heart racing. Found another slate, filled with reports, scans of symbols, sketches of roots with embedded eyes, predictions of behavior curves. One page showed our village's layout, complete with shrine placement and harvest schedule. They were grooming us, I whispered. Ren stood on shaky legs. We were born in a lie. Then she doubled over again, another seizure hitting like a hammer. She screamed, clutching her sides. I caught her, lowered her to the floor. Her skin rippled, not visibly, but I felt it, like something inside her was trying to stretch. Then it stopped. She gasped, blinked, and looked at me. "I'm still me," she whispered. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. "Let's get out of here," I said. "Let's find that shuttle the Tanners talked about. If it's real, we can leave. We don't have to die here." Ren didn't answer, but she took my hand, and I held it tight, even though it was warm, too warm, even though I felt something pulse beneath her skin. That night, the stars didn't come out. The sky above was covered in writhing clouds, shapes moving inside them that didn't follow natural laws. The moon flickered, the wind sang. Ren didn't sleep. She sat with her back to a tree, watching the earth, whispering in her sleep. I didn't ask what she was saying. I just stayed beside her, praying the love I felt could keep her rooted to herself, even as the world tried to pull her under. The sky cracked open on the third morning, not from a storm. Storms make sense. Storms come with wind and cloud and reason. This came with color, deep, churning ribbons of violet and gold bled through the sky like torn muscle. Something massive and unseen groaned overhead. The trees bent, not from wind, but from pressure, like the heavens themselves were leaning closer. Ren stared up, her skin pale and clammy. She hadn't slept again. Her fever came in pulses now, matching the rhythm in the earth. "It's close," she said, voice hoarse. "The blooming." We'd heard the word whispered before, but now it was everywhere, scrawled into tree bark, etched into the soil, murmured in the cries of birds that flew crooked and fell dead mid-flight. It was happening, the end, or the beginning, depending on which side you were on. We moved fast through the thinning woods. Every tree was wrong, twisted, weeping sap. Some cracked open, with bones blooming from the bark like fruit. The river we once drank from now ran red and thick, the water reeking of rust and wet meat. But we had a goal. A rumor passed to us by a dying man near the observatory. A shuttle, old, damaged, hidden in a ravine 2 valleys east. "I don't care if it's held together with string and prayer," I said. "If it flies, it's our way out." Ren nodded weakly. Her body trembled every few steps, but she pushed forward. She was still herself, mostly. The ravine was quiet, no chanting, no fog, just scorched dirt and silence. And there it was, half buried in the rock. its nose wedged deep into the cliffside. A patrol shuttle, old Imperial design, rusted, cracked canopy, but real, solid. Throne, I whispered. It exists. We scrambled toward it, hope burning through our exhaustion. The ramp was jammed, but a side panel had been pried open long ago. Inside it stank of mildew and age, but the Vox controls still blinked. A power node, half a fuel cell, a chance. Ren collapsed into the pilot's seat, laughing breathlessly. We could actually... Then, the ground shook. A tremor, then another. From beyond the ridge, a roar, not mechanical, not animal, but human voices blended into a single cry. Thousands, chanting, unified. I climbed up to the cracked window and peered out. They were coming, marching in perfect formation. Hundreds of villagers, thousands maybe, all smiling, all swaying, their clothes now robes, their flesh marked with spirals and growths. Some had no eyes, others had too many. All of them walked toward the forest's heart, toward a massive pit that hadn't been there before. It yawned from the earth like a wound, and something glowed within. Ren grabbed my arm. We have to go now. I don't think we can outrun that, I said, but maybe we can lift off. Even a few feet. Get over them. Find another ship. She nodded and we worked fast. She prepped the engines. I rerouted power. The systems hissed and blinked. Old lights sputtered to life. The machine wanted to fly. Then we heard the voices, closer than they should be. I turned and they were there, inside the shuttle's opening. Figures crawling in from the cracks. Villagers, children, elders. Some I knew, some I thought had died. All of them smiling. Welcome, they said in unison. We've been waiting. They surged. I shoved Ren behind me, pulled my rusted blade, slashing wildly. It cut flesh, but they didn't scream. They didn't bleed. They just laughed. A rising, gurgling joy that echoed in the steel chamber. One of them, a young man I once taught to fish, grabbed my arm and whispered, "The earth remembers you. It wants you." I headbutted him and kicked the panel beside the door, sealing it for a moment. "Go," I told Ren. "Start the thrusters. Lift us out." She froze. "Not without you." I shoved her toward the cockpit. "I'm right behind you." But the panel burst. Hands pulled me down. Dozens of them. Ren screamed. I was dragged backward, blade torn from my grip. My boots scraped against the metal floor as they pulled me through the side breach. The last thing I saw of her was her face, pressed against the cracked glass, screaming my name, tears streaking her face. Then, the dark took me. They didn't kill me. Not yet. They carried me, like a gift, through the valley, past the weeping trees and the rotting rivers, toward the pit, the blooming. It wasn't just a ritual site, it was alive. The earth pulsed, breathing like lungs beneath the soil. From its center rose tendrils of meat and bark, spiraling into the sky, forming a crude throne. At its base, a pulpit of roots, and in the pit below, something vast, slumbering, glowing with an inner light. It radiated warmth and rot and welcome. They laid me on an altar of stone and bone. I couldn't move. My limbs were held down by smiling villagers, their mouths sewn into permanent grins. A voice rose from the crowd, dozens, speaking as one. "This is the bloom, the fruit, the seed made flesh. You will feed it and become of it." Then she stepped forward. Ren, eyes hollow, face wet with tears. Still herself, still not. They forced her to watch. The roots pulsed beneath my back like veins beneath skin. Warm, wet, breathing. The altar wasn't stone, not really. It was something between wood and flesh, knotted, fibrous, veined with glowing sap that pulsed in rhythm with the chanting around me. It smelled like old blood and burnt incense. It moved beneath me with every word they spoke. I couldn't move. My wrists and ankles were bound in vines that had grown through my skin. They were inside me now, whispering, not in words, in sensations. They were tasting me, measuring, preparing. Above me the sky boiled, the clouds spun in concentric circles, violet and gold, forming an eye that blinked without a lid. Bolts of lightning struck the outer trees, and they didn't burn, they bloomed. Flowers opened wide from blackened bark, spilling crimson petals that floated upward, instead of falling, and surrounding it all were the villagers, our people, thousands of them, shoulder to shoulder, silent now, watching, smiling. Their eyes shone like polished bone, their mouths unmoving, their hands folded over their chests in reverence, and there, just beyond the altar, was Ren. Her arms were held by two of them, children with spiral-carved eyes and stitched lips. She wasn't struggling anymore. Her face was wet with tears, but her lips were moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, mouthing my name. Daren, still herself, still fighting, but barely. A figure stepped from the pit, not human, not fully. It was tall and robed in a cloak made of living roots, eyes blinking along its hem. Its head was crowned in bone antlers, and its face shifted every second, never holding one identity. It was every smiling face I had ever known. My father, my brother, Ren, the preacher, myself. It stepped closer, and I could feel its hunger. It was the seed, the thing beneath the world, the thing they had worshipped and fed and groomed, the thing the Inquisition had planted here to study, to test, and I was the final harvest. It raised one long, bark-covered hand and placed it on my chest. I screamed. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not fire, not steel. It was growth. 1,000 roots burrowing through my skin, blooming through my ribs, wrapping around my heart and lungs. I felt myself sprouting. I felt myself being used to feed it, used to bloom. Stop, Ren screamed. Her voice was hoarse, raw, real. For a moment, a heartbeat, the world paused. The creature looked up at her, not with surprise, with affection. You are next, it said in 1,000 voices. You are the seed's gift. She spat at it. I'll never join you. The seed smiled with my face. You already have. The chanting resumed, not from the mouths of the villagers, from the earth itself. Low, rumbling words in a language older than stars, vibrating through the roots, the rocks, the sky. It spoke through the wind, through the trees, through the pulsing in my veins. And then I died. Not quickly, not cleanly. They opened me from the inside. The roots burst from my chest like flowering vines, wrapping around the altar, spreading into the air like antennae. My blood wasn't red anymore. It glowed gold and purple, evaporating into pollen. I heard Ren scream. The last thing I saw was her face, horrified, broken, still fighting. Then the world went white. I don't know how long passed, but something of me remained. Not my body, not even my thoughts, just awareness. I could feel the vines now as they spread through the valley. I could see through their eyes, hear through the song they sang. They didn't use my name, but they used my pain. My death had been fertilizer for the bloom. Ren knelt at the altar for hours after. They didn't restrain her anymore. They didn't need to. She didn't move. She didn't run. She just stared at what was left of me. And when the seed offered her its hand, the same way it had offered mine, she turned her face away. I will never be yours. The seed tilted its head. You already are. The ritual was complete, but the bloom was only beginning. The pit yawned wider. Roots spread across the surface of the planet. The sky bled light like a second dawn. The villagers marched toward the mountains now, carrying pieces of me, of the altar, of the song. They were spreading it. Ren was left alone, not untouched, not unmarked, but free in a way. And that is the final cruelty. To survive, to carry the memory, to wonder how long she has left until the roots inside her finish blooming,